Ask most Americans to describe Missouri, and they go quiet. It's not the South. It's not exactly the Midwest. It's not the West. In survey after survey, it ranks among the least culturally distinct states in the country, a place people pass through, not a place that defines itself. And yet, every westward wagon train in American history passed through it. Every original transcontinental railroad proposal routed through it. The Oregon Trail began there. The Santa Fe Trail began there. The California Trail began there. The Mississippi River and the Missouri River, the two largest river systems on the continent, meet at a single city, St. Louis. That confluence drains 1.2 million square miles. 40% of the entire continental United States empties into one corridor. One funnel point. Missouri doesn't feel like much, but the continent is physically organized around it. That was never a choice. It was geography. Here's how Missouri is the gateway to everything. The Missouri River is the longest river in North America, not the Mississippi River. The Missouri. It stretches 2,341 miles from its headwaters in Montana to its confluence with the Mississippi just north of St. Louis. The Mississippi, above that point, is shorter. The Missouri wins. Most Americans have never been told this. Together, the Missouri-Mississippi drainage basin is the third largest river system on Earth. Only the Amazon and the Congo are bigger. The entire interior of the continent, from the Rockies to the Appalachians, from Canada to the Gulf, drains through this system. And the whole system converges in Missouri. By 1850, St. Louis was the fourth largest city in the United States, behind only New York, Baltimore, and Boston. Not Chicago, not Cincinnati, not New Orleans, St. Louis, a city that had existed for less than a century, built at the junction of the rivers. Its size was not a product of culture or industry or particular human cleverness. It was a product of position. The Oregon Trail, the Santa Fe Trail, and the California Trail, the three great arteries of westward migration, all began in Missouri. Specifically at Independence and St. Joseph, two towns on the western edge of the state, on the bank of the Missouri River. Those towns sit exactly where the river runs out of navigable depth for heavy supply boats. The trails began where the water ended, not where people lived, not where settlers preferred, but where the river drew the boundary and said, "From here, you walk." Missouri's cultural identity has always been hard to place. Its geographic identity has never been ambiguous for a single day. To understand why Missouri appears in every chapter of American infrastructure history, you need to look at the right kind of map, not a political map, a topographic one. The continent has a shape. The Rocky Mountains rise along the western third, running north to south in an almost unbroken wall. East of the Rockies, the land tilts. It tilts eastward and southward. Every raindrop that falls on the Great Plains is pushed by gravity in one direction, toward the Missouri River Valley. Every river that drains the Rockies' eastern face, the Platte, the Niobrara, the Cheyenne, the Yellowstone, flows into the Missouri. The Missouri carries all of it southeast towards St. Louis, where it joins the Mississippi, and the entire mass continues south toward the Gulf of Mexico. This is the Osage Slope. The continent is not flat, it tilts, and the tilt points at Missouri. Now imagine you are a wagon train organizer in 1843. You need to cross the continent. You need water for your animals, flat terrain for your wagons, a navigable river to carry your heaviest supplies as far inland as possible before the terrain becomes impassable. You study the geography. There is exactly one river system that runs deep into the continental interior from the east with enough volume to carry a supply chain. 1. The Missouri, and it is accessible as a navigable functional supply artery, beginning at its junction with the Mississippi, at St. Louis. Kansas City sits at the precise point where the Missouri River bends sharply south. Beyond that bend, the river becomes shallower and the open plains begin in full. That bend is the reason Kansas City exists. the last reliable staging point before the unbroken continent. People did not choose that location. The river drew the line, and the city grew where the line was drawn. In the summer of 1903, Thomas Jefferson received the paperwork for the Louisiana Purchase. The United States had doubled its territory overnight. Jefferson had no reliable maps for most of it, almost no information about what lay between the Mississippi and the Pacific. He needed to know. He tasked his personal secretary, Captain Meriwether Lewis, with leading an expedition across the continent. Jefferson wrote the instructions himself. They were precise, scientific, and practical. Document the geography, the river systems, the flora and fauna, the native nations, and above all, the potential for commerce. The rivers were the commerce. Jefferson consulted his top geographic advisors before authorizing the expedition. The surveyor Andrew Ellicott and Treasury Secretary Albert Gallatin, separately and independently, gave the same answer about where the expedition should begin: St. Louis. Not for political reasons, not for symbolic ones, because the Missouri River began there, because the Missouri River was the only viable corridor into the interior of the continent, because St. Louis was the only city in North America that had accumulated the geographic intelligence, the supply networks, and the river knowledge required to mount a transcontinental mission. Lewis arrived in St. Louis in December 1903 and spent nearly 5 months there before departure. He used that time to recruit men, gather intelligence, acquire supplies, and study every fragment of geographic information available about the western river systems. He could only do that in St. Louis because St. Louis sat at the hub of the fur trade, and the fur trade had been running up and down the Missouri River for 30 years. William Clark joined the expedition near Louisville, but the Corps of Discovery formally launched from Camp Dubois, directly across the river from St. Louis, in May 1904. They turned northwest, upstream on the Missouri, the only road west that existed. Even the President of the United States, commanding the largest land acquisition in American history, had no choice but to route his expedition through Missouri. The rivers had already decided. Jefferson simply agreed. Here is the harder question. Why did this continue? Wagon trails made sense before railroads. Railroads made sense before highways. Each new technology was supposed to give commerce new options, new routes, new cities, a way around geography. So why does Missouri keep appearing? The answer is that the drainage basin architecture of the continent is not a historical artifact. It is a permanent condition. The Osage Slope does not change. The Rocky Mountain Wall does not move. The rivers that drain the interior will continue draining it through the same valleys for as long as the continent exists. Before the railroads, every major fur trade route ran through St. Louis. The American Fur Company, founded by John Jacob Astor in 1808, built its entire continental operation around the Missouri River corridor. Fort Union, Fort Benton, Fort Pierre, the primary trading posts of the interior, were strung along the Missouri, all connected downstream to St. Louis. Every load of pelts, every shipment of trade goods, every message between the deep interior and the eastern markets passed through Louis because there was no alternative inland port with simultaneous access to the upper Missouri and the Gulf route. Military logistics followed the same geometry. During the Mexican-American War, Army supply lines ran through Missouri. During the Civil War, control of Missouri was a strategic priority for both sides, not because of its population or its loyalties, but because of its rivers. The Union's ability to operate in the Western Theater depended directly on the Missouri-Mississippi corridor. Losing St. Louis would have severed the supply line to the entire Western campaign. Then the railroads arrived, and something unexpected happened. The railroad was supposed to end geographic determinism. Steam power could go anywhere, track could be laid. Track could theoretically go anywhere. Cities began competing for transcontinental routes. Chicago lobbied. Memphis lobbied. Cincinnati made its case. For a brief moment in the 1850s, it seemed like Missouri's geographic monopoly might be breakable. In 1849, cholera arrived in St. Louis on a steamboat. The epidemic killed approximately 4,500 people, roughly 10% of the city's population at the time. The disease came up the river, the city suffered severely, and then it grew by 400% in the following decade. Because there was no geographic substitute. The corridor was the corridor. The epidemic did not change the drainage basin. When the Eads Bridge opened in 1874, the first permanent bridge across the Mississippi at St. Louis, it was not built to connect Missouri to the railroad network. It was built because the railroad network had already converged on St. Louis from every direction and had no way to cross. Other cities fought hard for the gateway title. Chicago made the most serious claim. It controlled Great Lakes trade, sat at the base of Lake Michigan, and had explosive railroad connections to the east. By the 1870s, Chicago was the fastest growing city in the world. Its promoters argued that transcontinental commerce should route north through Chicago rather than west through Missouri. They were not wrong about Chicago's power. They were wrong that it could replace Missouri's function. Chicago's network connected brilliantly to the East Coast and the Great Lakes. It did not have a direct, efficient path to the Southwest, the Southern Plains, or the Gulf. Reaching those markets from Chicago required routing south, back through Missouri, before the lines could effectively serve Kansas, Texas, and New Mexico. Chicago captured the northern tier. It did not capture the continental interior. Memphis pushed for a southern transcontinental route, bypassing Missouri entirely, running through Tennessee and northwest through Arkansas. The route was viable on paper. It could not generate sufficient financing because the major agricultural and commercial markets that justified large-scale railroad investment were concentrated along the Missouri River Valley, not south of it. Then, Congress weighed in. The Pacific Railroad Act of 1862, signed by Abraham Lincoln, designated Council Bluffs, Iowa, as the eastern terminus of the first transcontinental railroad. Some interpreted this as a northern route decision that would finally marginalize Missouri. Look at the map. Council Bluffs sits on the eastern bank of the Missouri River, directly across from Omaha. It was already connected south by rail to St. Louis and Kansas City before the transcontinental line was complete. The eastern traffic feeding the Transcontinental Railroad still moved through the Missouri corridor to reach Council Bluffs. The line crossed the Missouri River, the same corridor, at a point 250 miles north of Kansas City, but drawing from the same geographic logic. By the 1880s, federal land-grant railroad maps showed something striking. Every major western line radiated outward from St. Louis or Kansas City, like spokes from two hubs. Not because railroad companies preferred Missouri, because the terrain kept giving the engineers the same answer. Every time they modeled a route, the best path converged on the same corridor. They knew. The engineers always knew. Geography was not a problem to solve. It was the parameter they kept rediscovering. In 1956, President Dwight Eisenhower signed the Federal Aid Highway Act, creating the interstate highway system. The stated goals were national defense, economic efficiency, and relief from post-war traffic congestion. Highway engineers would design optimal routes using modern data. Geography, in theory, would be managed rationally at last. Interstate 70 runs east-west across Missouri, connecting St. Louis to Kansas City. It follows, with near-perfect precision, the same corridor as the wagon trails and the original railroad lines. The Army Corps of Engineers, which provided terrain data for the highway system's routing, was working from surveys that traced back to the same river valley geography that had set the trail routes more than a century earlier. The highway planners called it optimal routing. Lewis and Clark called it the Missouri River. It was the same answer. The twist here is not ironic, it is structural. The highway system was built explicitly to free American commerce from old geographic constraints. Cars and trucks could go anywhere. New infrastructure could create new corridors. And yet Interstate 70 in Missouri runs where it runs because the terrain analysis in 1954 returned the same verdict as the terrain analysis in 1804. Flat ground, low gradient, stable construction corridor, natural water access. The physical case for the Missouri River Valley does not expire. Today, Missouri ranks among the top 5 states in the country for total freight tonnage movement, despite having no major coastal port and no unusually large population. The Port of St. Louis, operating on the Mississippi, is one of the largest inland ports in the United States by annual cargo volume. Barge traffic still moves agricultural commodities, coal, petroleum, and industrial materials through the same confluence that made the city necessary 2 centuries ago. And then the second twist, fiber optic trunk lines, the physical cables carrying internet traffic across the continental United States, follow river valleys and railroad rights-of-way because those corridors offer flat terrain, established legal easements, and existing infrastructure paths. The major east-west fiber routes crossing the American interior pass through Missouri through the same corridor. The digital economy moves on the same physical spine that the water carved. Missouri's lock-in did not stop at the industrial era. It extended straight into the one that followed. Return to the beginning. Missouri is still hard to place. Ask someone where it belongs culturally, and they will hesitate. Is it the South? The Midwest? The border? The answer keeps shifting, depending on who is asked and which part of the state they know. Northern Missouri feels different from the Ozarks. St. Louis feels different from Kansas City. The state has never cohered into a single cultural identity the way Georgia, Iowa, or Montana have. That confusion is the tell. It is the signature of a place that belongs to every region because it connects all of them. Missouri is not Southern or Midwestern or Western in the way those other states are. It is the CAM. It is where the regions meet and seems, by definition, take on the character of everything they join. That is not a weakness. That is the function. The Gateway Arch stands on the riverfront in St. Louis, 630 feet tall, sheathed in stainless steel, visible for miles. It frames nothing but sky, no mountain behind it, no dramatic foreground, just an arch and the river and the horizon. People sometimes find this anticlimactic. They expected it to point at something. It does. Look at where it stands. It stands at the confluence of the Missouri and Mississippi rivers. It stands at the point where every trail, every railroad, every interstate, and every fiber corridor has been pulled by the same invisible force for 200 years. It is not marking where the West begins. It is marking where the continent converges. The arch is not a symbol of Western romance. It is a geographic monument, and it is more accurate than almost anything else built in this country. Missouri is forgettable because it is infrastructural, and infrastructure is only invisible until it fails. The rivers have not failed. The corridor has not closed. The funnel is still open. Everything still moves through Missouri. It always has. It always will.